Alright, so I decided to do my project on ball python health management, and so today I brought in my own personal pet snake. So some common health problems that they suffer from would be anorexia, which is whenever they don't want to eat, and sometimes this is really common in these guys because they like to go off food for a couple of weeks, especially if they're shedding. They won't eat for about 14 days. Regurgitation, which is another big problem that they have. That's basically from overhandling them, transporting them after they've consumed food. And it's not exactly the best thing because basically regurgitation is whenever it's still above the stomach or in the stomach, whereas it would be considered vomiting if it were below the stomach or anything past that. So they actually will regurgitate food, and then they get what's called mouth rot. It's also known as infectious stomatitis. That's it's more of a management problem. It's caused from severe stress, and can also be caused from bacteria. Then you also can get your pneumonia, which is another health management problem. Mostly that stems from either being stressed, something underlying is going on that's causing additional immune suppression, or even just having the humidity too high in the tank. And then you also have improper shedding or retained shed, which can get really dangerous for these little guys. So a couple of the husbandry malpractices that I really have noticed, especially whenever I've worked in pet stores before, a lot of people put these guys on unsafe bedding, which is anything basically that's small, sticks to their prey, and can be ingested. So basically, like if you get a snake, and especially when these guys are really young, they like to gum their food a lot, just to kind of get the texture right for them. And whenever that happens, if you're feeding them inside their enclosure, say they're on like cypress bedding, that'll stick to it, and most of the time they end up ingesting it, so they get problems like even impaction. Unthawed frozen mice is another common problem. Basically, some people, they don't like to fully thaw out their mice before they feed them, which is bad, because a snake's metabolism mostly is comprised, or it's very dependent on their environmental temperature. So if you're putting an ice cube inside a snake, it's not going to go very well. Also, improper humidity and temperature. Not only is their metabolism dependent on temperature, but their overall just well-being. Temperature can also affect how they shed. And these guys have to have about 50 to 60% humidity. They're sub-desert, so they're not fully tropical where they need like 80% humidity. But if they have improper humidity, that can also be one of the reasons why they get pneumonia. And then lack of observation, that's mostly during feeding. For people who feed live mice like I do, if they leave their snake along with the mouse and they aren't paying attention, things can happen. Like, for instance, the mouse can scare the snake to the point where the snake won't eat it, then the mouse ends up eating your snake, because then the mouse gets hungry. You also have to be careful whenever you're feeding live, because you have to watch to make sure that your snake didn't get bit, because that can cause future problems later down the road, such as like if it punctures the skin, they can get severe skin infections. And it's a better practice to actually monitor them whenever they're eating live. And then also feeding inside closures. I wouldn't really recommend it because it teaches them that every single time that lid comes off, they're getting fed. So if you want to reach in there, they think they're getting fed and they'll strike out at you and try to bite you.
So where do you feed your snakes in? What's ideal?
I started feeding them outside the enclosures, and sometimes we just don't have a big enough feed box currently. So right now they are getting fed inside their enclosures, and one way we get around that is we take their water dishes and their hides out. That way it's more of just them on their bedding, because this guy, he's big enough now, he doesn't gum his food, so the cypress bedding isn't sticking to him as bad, or even at all. And most of the time, my snakes, they start spitting. It looks kind of funny, but they're actually spitting and kind of stretching their mouth out to get the cypress off, and if we notice it, whenever we watch feeding, we actually will get in there and pull it out of their mouth for them.
I got another question on the humidity. I know you said like your snake there is like 50%. You didn't say temperature. Then the general question is, does it vary by snake the proper humidity
Yeah,
and temperature?
so-
Give me some examples.
For these guys, temperature is going to be lowest is a 75-degree temperature, and then the highest is a 96-degree.
Okay.
It really depends on where they're from. If they're more desert, they're going to need higher temperatures, but nothing typically above 110. If they're more tropical, they're going to need lower temperatures during the nighttime, but I would say probably about 80 degrees during the day. And then the humidity also plays a role in that because that can increase temperature, or, I mean, if your tank's too hot and you need a snake that needs a lot of humidity, it's actually going to dry out the tank. So this is what mouth rot looks like. This is mouth rot. And as you can see, compared to the healthy mouth over here, that's nasty. That's obviously very abnormal, and that's mostly just because either the snake's been stressed out. A lot of these problems that comes up in these guys comes from underlying health issues. It could be mites, which can be transported through bad breeding and bad cleanliness of their enclosure. It could be genetic sometimes. It also can really just be a multitude of things. It could be bacterial, fungal, all sorts of stuff like that. So this is pneumonia. The X-ray picture actually doesn't show pneumonia. It's just an X-ray of a snake, and that was how they would diagnose pneumonia. Also, if you see a snake ever gape like this, snakes don't do that. Snakes shouldn't be doing that. If they're having to
gaping, you said.
Yeah, so if they're opening their mouth and they're trying to breathe, like if I ever caught him doing that, then I would know that, hey, there's a big problem going on. And most of the time what happens whenever they get pneumonia is if they're a desert animal and they're in too high of a humidity, it actually will cause too much water vapor inside their lungs, and they can't handle that. If it's a like subtropical snake and it's in too dry, the mucus lining that covers their lungs or their air sacs actually dries up, and then they can't breathe properly. So pneumonia is also kind of one of those things too where it happens whenever they're immune suppressed from underlying causes. So a lot of the treatments for a lot of these health management problems actually come from, they're mostly coming from, you have to figure out, okay, is it something that I'm doing that's malpractice? Is it something that's wrong with them? Do they have mites? And typically they try to treat it with antibiotics. Pneumonia is kind of one of those things where it doesn't always work. And so it's hard to kind of treat some of these. Improper shedding is a big problem in these guys. I actually read somewhere it's genetic. I actually didn't know that, but basically what happens is a water layer, whenever they go to shed, they shed because they're growing, and so it's actual skin that they're shedding. And a water layer will form between these two layers, the old skin and the new skin, and if your snake is dehydrated, if it's not in proper humidity, it will actually do what's called improper shedding or retained shed, which is what this guy right here has. And you can see right here, that's some of the retained shed, and that's normally fixed by putting something moist in there, giving them warm water baths. You can also peel it off yourself. They don't exactly like that though. And then where it gets problematic is not only because if you don't get it off, it can actually cause that tissue to necrose and die off. Especially if you get it on their eyes like this, so that opaqueness is not normal. If you were to look at a normal eye on a ball python, it would be clear. So if you get problems like that where you aren't shedding your eye caps, you basically have to grab their head and pull it off. And it's not easy to get it off because if it's just the eye cap, it's really on there. And that's whenever you actually have to wrestle the snake, and because they're very head shy, so they don't like their heads being touched. Another place that is actually problematic is on their tip of their tail. So these guys are like tubes, and whenever their tail, it comes to an end, so it tapers off, and it's one single scale. And if you have any slight amount of shed on there, if you don't catch it and it just starts cutting off that circulation as the snake's growing, you can actually lose the tip of their tail. So that's a few of the problems. And then this is impaction, which is from consuming the bedding that they're on at the same time. And you can see right here, that's actually where they would be impacted. And if you look at a snake from the outside that's impacted, they're obviously not the same throughout. It's a little bit different if they're like eating food. They're fat whenever they eat the food, and you can see where it's at. But an impaction normally builds up to the point where they can't poop, and you have a lot of browns after it. So, and that's it.
Okay, questions?
What's the primary way of giving a snake an antibiotic? Just a vaccine?
Okay,
It's
the
gonna
question
be-
that you might not have heard, the question is how do you give snakes antibiotics?
Yeah, it's going to be mostly oral. These guys don't really like needles. I've never heard of someone putting a needle in a snake. I know so I've grown up with them for a long time, and I know whenever my dad had one that needed antibiotics, we were giving it orally.
They actually there's an antibiotic called Cephas drops, and it's like oranges, and snakes love them. And so we usually start with that and then go from there.
Okay. Oral then.
Mm-hmm.
Per os, in other words.